The auditorium of the Manchester Apollo Theatre buzzed with anticipation on a crisp Saturday afternoon in October 2018. Nearly 2,000 people filled the historic venue, their excited chatter echoing off the ornate walls and high ceiling. This was the regional audition round for Britain's Got Talent, one of the most popular television talent competitions in the United Kingdom. Contestants of all ages and abilities had traveled from across northern England for a chance to perform before the judges and potentially advance to the televised rounds that could change their lives forever. Backstage in the holding area, a small figure sat swinging her legs from a chair that was clearly too large for her. Sophie Martinez was 6 years old, with dark curls pulled back in a neat ponytail and wearing a simple white dress with pink flowers that her grandmother had bought especially for this occasion. Her feet, clad in shiny black shoes, dangled several inches above the floor. In her lap, she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit named Mr. Hops that had been her companion since she was a baby. Sophie's mother, Maria Martinez, knelt beside her daughter's chair, smoothing down the child's dress for what must have been the 20th time. Maria was 32 years old, a single mother who worked as a nurse at the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital. Her hands trembled slightly as she fussed with Sophie's hair, betraying the nervousness she was trying hard to conceal. This audition represented something that Maria had never quite dared to hope for, a possibility that her daughter's extraordinary gift might be recognized beyond their small circle of family and friends. "Mommy, you're making my hair too tight," Sophie said in her high, clear voice, reaching up to touch the ribbon her mother had just adjusted. "Sorry, me Amber," Maria replied, forcing herself to stop fidgeting. "I just want you to look perfect. But you always say that what matters is the music, not how I look," Sophie pointed out with the logical precision that 6-year-olds sometimes possess. Maria smiled despite her anxiety. "You're right, sweetheart, the music is what matters. Are you nervous?" Sophie considered the question seriously, tilting her head to one side in a gesture that always reminded Maria of her late husband. "A little bit," she admitted. "But Mr. Hops says I'll do fine." "Mr. Hops is very wise," Maria agreed, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. The journey to this audition had begun in the most ordinary way imaginable. When Sophie was 3 years old, Maria had enrolled her in a local community music class, the kind of basic introduction to rhythm and melody that hundreds of preschoolers attend every week. The teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had noticed almost immediately that Sophie possessed an unusual ear for music. She could reproduce melodies after hearing them just once, and she seemed to understand musical patterns with an intuitive comprehension that was far beyond her years. Mrs. Patterson had gently suggested to Maria that Sophie might benefit from piano lessons, though she cautioned that finding a teacher willing to work with such a young child could be challenging. Many piano instructors preferred to wait until children were at least 7 or 8, when their hands were larger and their attention spans more developed. But Maria had taken the advice to heart, driven by memories of her own childhood. She had grown up in a small village in the Philippines where access to music education was virtually non-existent. Her family had been too poor to afford instruments or lessons, but she had always loved music and often wondered what might have been possible if she'd had opportunities. When she immigrated to England at 23 and eventually had Sophie, she had promised herself that her daughter would have chances that she herself had never received. Finding a piano teacher willing to take on a 3-year-old student had proven difficult. Maria had contacted 7 different instructors before finally connecting with David Chen, a retired concert pianist in his 70s who taught from his home in Chorlton. David had initially been skeptical when Maria called, explaining that he rarely worked with students under 10 years old. But something in Maria's earnest plea had convinced him to at least meet Sophie and assess her aptitude. That first meeting had been transformative. David had sat Sophie at his grand piano and played a simple 5-note melody, then asked her to play it back. She had done so perfectly. He had played something more complex, 8 notes with a specific rhythm. Again, she reproduced it flawlessly. Then David had played a short passage from a Mozart sonata, something no 3-year-old should have been able to remember, let alone replicate. Sophie had listened intently, her small face serious with concentration. Then she had reached out her tiny hands and played back the passage, note for note, with nearly perfect rhythm. Her fingers were too small to span the intervals properly, and she lacked the strength to produce the correct dynamics, but the musical understanding was undeniably there. David had looked at Maria with an expression of shock and wonder. "Mrs. Martinez," he had said slowly, "your daughter has what we call perfect pitch, and her musical memory is extraordinary. I've been teaching piano for 50 years, and I've only encountered this level of natural ability a handful of times. If you're willing to commit to regular lessons, I would be honored to work with Sophie." That had been 3 years ago. Since then, Sophie had progressed at a rate that astonished everyone who heard her play. She practiced every day on the upright piano that Maria had purchased secondhand, saving for months to afford even that modest instrument. David had reduced his fees significantly to make the lessons affordable for Maria's nursing salary, recognizing that Sophie's talent deserved nurturing regardless of her family's financial circumstances. By age 5, Sophie was playing pieces that most piano students didn't attempt until they were teenagers. She had performed Chopin's Prelude in E minor, several of Bach's easier preludes, and various compositions by Mozart and Beethoven. Her small hands limited what she could physically play, but her musical maturity and interpretive depth were remarkable. David had been the one to suggest entering Sophie in Britain's Got Talent. "She needs a larger platform," he had told Maria one afternoon after a lesson. "The world should hear what she can do. This isn't just about a talented child playing piano. Sophie has something special, something that touches people's hearts when they hear her play. She deserves an audience beyond our living rooms." Maria had been hesitant, worried about exposing her young daughter to the pressure and potential criticism of a televised competition. She had heard stories about child performers who burned out or developed anxiety from too much early pressure. But David had been persuasive, and eventually Maria had agreed to submit an application. The response had come 6 weeks later, an invitation to the regional auditions in Manchester. Maria had requested the day off from work, and her mother had traveled from London to provide moral support. Sophie's grandmother, Alina, was waiting in the audience right now, clutching her handbag and probably saying silent prayers. A production assistant appeared in the doorway of the holding area, clipboard in hand. "Sophie Martinez. You're up in 5 minutes." Maria felt her stomach drop. Sophie slid down from the chair, still holding Mr. Hops, and looked up at her mother with those serious dark eyes that seemed too wise for such a small face. "It's time, Mommy," Sophie said simply. They followed the production assistant through a maze of corridors, the sounds of the audience growing louder as they approached the stage area. Maria could hear music from another contestant's performance, though she couldn't identify what was happening. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain everyone around her could hear it. They reached the wings of the stage, where they could see out into the vast auditorium. The stage itself was enormous, with dramatic lighting and a beautiful grand piano positioned center stage. Sophie's eyes widened when she saw the piano, which was far larger and more impressive than the instruments she was accustomed to playing. The current act finished to polite applause, and the judges offered their critiques. Maria recognized the voices of the 3 judges from watching the show on television. There was Simon Cowell, the famously harsh but fair music executive whose opinion could make or break a performer's career. Beside him sat Amanda Holden, an actress and television personality known for her warmth and enthusiasm. The third judge was David Walliams, a comedian and children's author who often connected especially well with young contestants. The stage manager approached Maria and Sophie. "All right, love," he said kindly, kneeling down to Sophie's level. "You're going to walk out there when I give you the signal, go straight to the piano and wait for the judges to say hello." "Can you do that?" Sophie nodded solemnly. She handed Mr. Hops to her mother. "Take care of him, Mommy. I need my hands free for playing." Maria took the stuffed rabbit, fighting back tears. Her baby was about to walk onto that enormous stage alone, about to perform for judges whose critiques were watched by millions, about to take a leap into an unknown future that both thrilled and terrified her mother. "I love you so much," Maria whispered, pulling Sophie into a quick hug. "Just remember what Mr. Chen taught you. Listen to the music inside you and let your fingers tell the story." "I will," Sophie promised. Then the stage manager gave the signal, and Sophie Martinez, just 6 years old and small for her age, walked out onto the stage of the Manchester Apollo Theatre alone, her white dress bright under the spotlights, her head held high despite her obvious nervousness, ready to show the judges and the world what she could do. Sophie walked across the vast stage with careful, measured steps, her small figure almost swallowed by the enormous space around her. The audience, which had been chattering between acts, gradually fell silent as people noticed just how tiny this next contestant was. A few sympathetic awes rippled through the crowd as Sophie made her way to the grand piano that sat gleaming under the stage lights. When she reached the piano bench, Sophie realized immediately that she had a problem. The bench was positioned at the standard height for adult performers, and even when she climbed onto it, her feet dangled far above the floor. She looked uncertain for a moment, glancing back toward the wings where her mother stood watching anxiously. Simon Cowell leaned forward at the judges' table, his expression unreadable. "Hello there," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the theater's sound system. "What's your name?" "Sophie Martinez," she replied, her voice small but clear. The microphones picked up every word. "And how old are you, Sophie?" Amanda Holden asked with a warm smile. I'm 6 years old, I'll be 7 in January. David Williams raised his eyebrows in surprise. 6 years old. My goodness, and what are you going to do for us today? I'm going to play piano, Sophie said simply. Have you been playing for long? Simon asked, his tone neutral but not unkind. 3 years, my teacher is Mr. Chen. He used to play in concerts all over the world, but now he's retired and he teaches me. Amanda exchanged glances with the other judges. A 6-year-old who had been playing for 3 years was unusual enough, but having a teacher who was a former concert pianist suggested that this might be more than just a cute child doing a simple piece. Before we start, Simon said, I notice you're having some trouble with the bench there. Do you need us to adjust it? Sophie shook her head. No, thank you. Mr. Chen taught me that real pianists have to adjust to different pianos and different benches. He says it's part of being professional. I just need to sit back a little bit more. She wiggled backward on the bench until she found a position where she could reach the keys comfortably, even though her feet swung freely in the air. The audience chuckled warmly at her determination and problem-solving. Very professional indeed, David Williams said, clearly charmed. So what are you going to play for us? I'm going to play Fantasie Impromptu by Frédéric Chopin, Sophie announced. It's Opus 66. The judges' expressions changed immediately. Amanda's mouth fell open slightly. David sat up straighter in his chair. Even Simon's carefully maintained poker face showed a flicker of surprise. The Fantasie Impromptu was one of Chopin's most technically demanding pieces, requiring extraordinary finger independence, rapid passages in both hands playing different rhythms simultaneously, and sophisticated musical interpretation. Professional pianists spent years mastering it. The idea that a 6-year-old was about to attempt it seemed almost absurd. In the wings, Maria pressed her hand to her mouth. She had known what piece Sophie planned to play, had heard her practice it countless times over the past 3 months. But hearing her daughter announce it to the judges, seeing their reactions, made the audacity of the choice suddenly very real. David Chen had suggested the piece, believing that Sophie's unique gifts were best showcased through challenging repertoire rather than simplified children's music. But now Maria wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. What if Sophie froze? What if the pressure was too much? What if she failed spectacularly in front of all these people? Simon leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. That's quite an ambitious choice for someone your age. Are you sure you're ready for this? Sophie nodded seriously. Yes, sir. Mr. Chen says I shouldn't play easy things just because I'm little. He says I should play what's in my heart, and this music is in my heart. Well then, Simon said, and for the first time a hint of a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Let's hear what's in your heart. Sophie turned to face the piano. She placed her small hands on the keys, her fingers finding their starting positions. For a moment she sat completely still, and the entire auditorium held its breath. Then her hands began to move. The opening notes of the Fantasie Impromptu tumbled forth in a cascade of sound. Sophie's tiny fingers flew across the keyboard with astonishing speed and precision, navigating the piece's notoriously difficult opening passage with confidence that seemed impossible for someone so young. The characteristic rhythm of the piece, with the right hand playing rapid notes against the left hand's different pattern, emerged clearly despite her small hands. Within seconds, the audience's condescending amusement transformed into genuine astonishment. This wasn't a child playing a simplified version or struggling through something beyond her abilities. This was real musicianship, sophisticated and moving. Sophie's interpretation had a delicate beauty that suited her age while also demonstrating remarkable technical control. Amanda Holden's hand went to her heart, her eyes already glistening with tears. David Williams leaned forward, transfixed. Even Simon's skeptical expression had given way to focused attention, his expert ear recognizing that something extraordinary was happening on that stage. The famous lyrical middle section of the piece arrived, and Sophie's playing took on a different character. Where the outer sections were brilliant and energetic, this part required tenderness and singing tone. Her small hands drew a surprisingly full sound from the piano, and her musical phrasing showed an understanding of the melody's emotional content that seemed far beyond her years. In the audience, Sophie's grandmother Alina was crying openly, her hands clasped together as she watched her tiny granddaughter command that enormous stage. Around her, other audience members were equally moved, some wiping away tears, others simply staring in wonder. Maria watched from the wings, tears streaming down her face. She thought about all the sacrifices that had led to this moment. The extra shifts she had worked to pay for lessons and the piano. The evenings spent encouraging Sophie to practice when she would rather play outside. The worry that she was pushing her daughter too hard, expecting too much. All of it had been leading to this, to Sophie sharing her gift with the world in the most spectacular way possible. As the piece built toward its dramatic conclusion, Sophie's hands raced across the keys with increasing intensity. The final cascading passages emerged with crystalline clarity, each note perfectly placed despite the breakneck tempo. Then with a flourish she played the final chords, bringing the performance to its triumphant end, for a heartbeat silence. Then the auditorium erupted. The audience leaped to their feet in a spontaneous standing ovation, their applause thunderous and sustained. People were shouting, cheering, some openly weeping. It was the kind of response usually reserved for the finale of a major concert, not for a regional audition. Sophie sat at the piano, her small hands still resting on the keys, looking uncertain about what to do next. She turned to face the judges with an expression that mixed hope and nervousness, waiting for their verdict. All three judges were standing and applauding. Amanda had tears running down her face. David was shaking his head in disbelief, grinning widely. Simon was clapping with his hands raised high, a genuine smile on his face. When the audience finally quieted enough for them to speak, Amanda went first, her voice choked with emotion. "Sophie, that was absolutely incredible. I have 3 children, and I can tell you that what you just did is not normal for a 6-year-old. That was one of the most beautiful performances I've ever heard on this stage, and I mean that sincerely. You're extraordinary." David Walliams nodded enthusiastically. "I'm completely gobsmacked, as we say in Britain. I've written children's books, I work with kids all the time, and I thought I understood what young people were capable of. But you've just completely redefined my understanding. That was world-class piano playing, regardless of age, absolutely magnificent." Then it was Simon's turn. The famously harsh judge looked at Sophie for a long moment before speaking, and when he did, his voice carried genuine warmth. "Sophie, I'm going to be very honest with you. When you walked out here and told us what you were going to play, I thought to myself, this is going to be a disaster. I've heard professional pianists struggle with that piece. The idea that a 6-year-old was going to attempt it seemed like a recipe for embarrassment." He paused and Sophie's face fell slightly, bracing for criticism. "But," Simon continued, his expression softening, "you didn't just attempt it. You conquered it. What I just witnessed was one of the most remarkable things I've seen in all my years of judging talent competitions. You're not just talented, Sophie, you're potentially a genuine prodigy." That performance was absolutely sensational. Sophie's face lit up with the biggest smile Maria had ever seen. "Thank you," she said softly. "Now," Simon said, "it's time for us to vote. Amanda, what do you say?" Amanda pressed the button in front of her, and a large illuminated yes appeared on the screen behind the judges. "That's a massive yes from me." David pressed his button immediately. "Yes, absolutely yes." Simon smiled and pressed his own button. 3 yeses. "Sophie Martinez, you're going through to the next round." The audience exploded into applause again. Sophie climbed down from the piano bench and walked to the front of the stage, where she gave a small, careful bow just as Mr. Chen had taught her. Then she ran off stage into her mother's waiting arms. Maria swept Sophie up in a tight embrace, laughing and crying at the same time. "You were perfect, me Amber, absolutely perfect." "Did I really do good, mommies?" Sophie asked, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "You did better than good, sweetheart, you were amazing." A production assistant approached them with a huge smile. "That was incredible. We need to get some quick interview footage with you both for the show, if that's okay." As Maria and Sophie followed the assistant to the interview area, they passed other contestants who had been waiting to perform. Several of them applauded as Sophie walked by, and one older man called out, "Well done, little one, you're going to win this whole thing." The interview was brief, with producers asking Sophie how she felt about the performance and what it meant to advance to the next round. Sophie answered in her straightforward, earnest way, explaining that she loved playing piano because it let her share feelings that were too big for words, and that she was very happy the judges liked her playing. When they finally made it back to the holding area to collect their belongings, they found Alina waiting for them, still dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Mi nieta preciosa," she said, pulling Sophie into a hug. "Your abuelo would have been so proud. He's watching from heaven, I know it." Maria felt fresh tears at the mention of her late husband, Carlos, who had died in a car accident when Sophie was only 2 years old. He had never heard his daughter play piano, had never known about her extraordinary gift. But Maria liked to believe that he somehow knew, that he was indeed watching and marveling at the beautiful, talented child they had created together. The weeks following Sophie's audition passed in a blur of activity and growing excitement. The Britain's Got Talent production team had been clear that the audition would not air on television for several months, and they asked Maria to keep news of Sophie's success relatively quiet until the broadcast. But word inevitably spread through their community in Manchester. David Chen told a few of his colleagues in the classical music world. Alina couldn't resist sharing the news with friends at her church in London. Soon, local newspapers were calling Maria for interviews, eager to do feature stories on the 6-year-old piano prodigy from their area. Maria tried to maintain as much normalcy as possible in Sophie's life. She still attended her regular primary school, still had playdates with friends, still spent Sunday afternoons visiting her grandmother. But the piano practice intensified. David Chen, energized by Sophie's success and the platform it might provide, began working with her on even more challenging repertoire. If she makes it to the live shows, David explained to Maria one afternoon, she'll need pieces that will captivate a television audience. The acoustics and atmosphere will be completely different from an audition theater. We need to choose music that's both technically impressive and emotionally accessible to viewers at home. They selected several possibilities, including Liszt's La Campanella, known for its show-stopping difficulty and memorable melodies, and Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata Third Movement, which combined dramatic power with technical fireworks. Sophie practiced diligently, her small fingers gradually building the strength and agility these pieces demanded. The audition episode finally aired on a Saturday evening in late March 2019. Maria had invited a dozen family members and close friends to watch together at their small apartment. The living room was packed with people perched on every available surface, plates of Filipino food covering the coffee table, everyone chattering nervously as they waited for Sophie's segment to appear. When it finally came on screen, the room fell silent. Maria watched herself on television, looking anxious in the wings as Sophie walked onto that enormous stage. She had forgotten how tiny her daughter had appeared, how impossibly young she looked standing next to that grand piano. Fresh anxiety gripped her even though she knew the outcome, knew that Sophie had triumphed. Then Sophie began to play, and Maria heard the collective gasp from their gathered friends and family, most of whom had never actually heard Sophie perform a major piece. They had known she was talented, but seeing and hearing it on television, with the professional sound quality and dramatic camera angles, made the performance even more impactful. When the segment ended with the judges giving their 3 yeses and Sophie running into Maria's arms, the living room erupted in cheers and applause. Elena was crying again, and several of Maria's friends from the hospital were wiping away tears. "I can't believe that's our Sophie," one of them said wonderingly. "I mean, I've seen her around, played with her, she's just a regular little girl, but that performance was absolutely extraordinary." The response on social media was immediate and overwhelming. The video of Sophie's audition was shared thousands of times within hours. Comments poured in from around the world, expressing amazement at her talent and age. Several famous pianists and musicians tweeted about the performance, praising Sophie's technical ability and musical maturity. But not all the response was positive. Some comments questioned whether a 6-year-old should be performing at this level, suggesting that her parents were pushing her too hard or robbing her of a normal childhood. Others speculated that the performance had been enhanced through studio trickery, refusing to believe a child could genuinely play that well. A few cruel comments mocked Sophie's appearance or made snide remarks about her being a trained monkey rather than a true artist. Maria tried to shield Sophie from the negative comments, but the criticism still stung. She found herself lying awake at night, second-guessing every decision she had made. Was she pushing Sophie too hard? Should she have waited until her daughter was older before entering her in such a high-profile competition? Was the pressure and attention too much for a 6-year-old to handle? David Chen, with his decades of experience in the classical music world, provided valuable perspective. "There will always be critics," he told Maria over tea one afternoon while Sophie practiced in the next room. "Some people cannot accept that extraordinary talent exists, especially in children. They prefer to believe that what Sophie does is somehow fake or manufactured, because accepting her genuine gift forces them to confront their own limitations." "But what if they're right?" Maria asked quietly. "What if I am pushing her too hard? What if this pressure damages her somehow?" David set down his teacup and looked at Maria seriously. "Do you force Sophie to practice?" "No, she actually loves it. Sometimes I have to tell her to stop and go play outside." "Does she seem anxious or unhappy about the performances?" Maria thought about this carefully. "No, she gets nervous, but she also seems excited. And afterward she's always happy, proud of herself." "Then trust your daughter," David advised. "Sophie will tell you if it becomes too much. Children are remarkably honest about their feelings if we listen to them. What you're doing is supporting her gift, not exploiting it. There's a crucial difference." The call from Britain's Got Talent came in mid-April. Sophie had been selected for the live semi-finals, which would take place in May at the Hammersmith Apollo in London. She would be one of 40 acts competing over 5 nights, with 8 acts performing each evening. Only 2 acts from each semifinal would advance to the final, one chosen by judges and one by public vote. The news was both thrilling and terrifying. The live shows would be broadcast to millions of viewers across the UK and streamed internationally. The pressure would be immense, the stakes incredibly high. And Sophie would be competing not just against other children, but against adult performers of all types. Singers, dancers, comedians, variety acts, all hoping for their moment of breakthrough success. Maria took a week off work to bring Sophie to London for rehearsals. They stayed with Alina in her small flat in Hackney, transforming the spare bedroom into a temporary base of operations. The Britain's Got Talent production team was professional and supportive, but the scale of the operation was overwhelming. Massive cameras, complex lighting rigs, armies of crew members, all focused on creating compelling television. During rehearsals, Sophie got to meet some of the other contestants. There was a singing group of teenage boys, a comedian in his 50s who had been performing in small clubs for decades, a dance troupe from Birmingham, and a woman who did elaborate sand art. Everyone was kind to Sophie, charmed by her youth and impressed when they heard her play during sound check. The night of Sophie's semi-final performance arrived with nerve-wracking speed. Maria helped her daughter into the dress they had chosen together, a beautiful blue velvet gown that Alina had made specially for the occasion. Sophie's hair was professionally styled, and makeup artists had applied just enough cosmetics to ensure she looked good on camera without appearing overly made up. Backstage, the atmosphere was electric with tension. The other acts paced nervously, ran through last-minute rehearsals, or sat in meditation trying to calm their nerves. Sophie sat quietly in her dressing room holding Mr. Hops and occasionally running through finger exercises on a practice keyboard. "How are you feeling, me Amber?" Maria asked, kneeling beside her daughter. "I'm excited," Sophie said honestly, "and a little scared, but Mr. Chen says that being a little scared helps you play better because it makes you focus harder." "Mr. Chen is very wise," Maria agreed, echoing the conversation they had had months earlier before the first audition. "Remember, no matter what happens tonight, I'm so proud of you. Win or lose, you're already amazing." Sophie was scheduled to perform 5th in the lineup of 8 acts. They watched the first 4 performances on a monitor in the dressing room. A magician who made doves appear, a young singer performing a power ballad, an elderly man doing a comedy routine about aging, and a group of acrobats from China. Each act was met with enthusiastic applause, and all of them seemed polished and professional. Then it was Sophie's turn. A production assistant came to escort them to the stage entrance. As they walked through the corridors, Maria could hear the muffled sound of the live audience, thousands of people waiting to be entertained. At the stage entrance, Sophie handed Mr. Hops to her mother just as she had at the first audition. "Take care of him, Mommy, I'll be back soon." Maria watched her daughter walk onto the stage alone, that tiny figure in the blue velvet dress stepping into the spotlight. The audience's reaction was immediate and warm, a collective awe at seeing someone so young. The hosts of the show, Ant and Dec, greeted Sophie with friendly enthusiasm, asking her a few quick questions before turning things over to the judges. This time, the judges' panel included a 4th person in addition to Simon, Amanda, and David. Alesha Dixon, a singer and television personality, was known for her emotional responses to performances and her particular appreciation for young talent. "Sophie, you were absolutely brilliant in your audition," Amanda said warmly. "Are you ready to show us what else you can do?" "Yes, ma'am," Sophie replied, her voice carrying clearly through the theater's sound system. "What are you playing for us tonight?" Simon asked. "I'm going to play the 3rd movement from Moonlight Sonata by Ludwig van Beethoven," Sophie announced. Simon's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Another challenging choice. We wouldn't expect anything less from you. Good luck." Sophie walked to the grand piano and climbed onto the bench. She adjusted her position, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The stage lights dimmed, leaving only a spotlight on Sophie and the piano. The audience fell into expectant silence. Then she began to play. The opening of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata 3rd movement exploded from the piano with furious energy. Sophie's hands attacked the keys with a power that seemed impossible from someone so small, drawing a commanding sound from the instrument. The piece, officially titled Presto Agitato, is one of Beethoven's most technically demanding compositions, requiring rapid arpeggios, dramatic dynamic contrasts, and sustained intensity throughout its nearly 7-minute duration. Sophie had practiced this piece relentlessly for the past month, building the stamina needed to maintain the furious tempo from beginning to end. Now, under the stage lights with millions watching, her preparation showed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard in a blur of motion, navigating the treacherous passages with remarkable accuracy. But it wasn't just the technical accomplishment that stunned the audience. It was the emotional maturity of her interpretation. The third movement of the Moonlight Sonata is often described as depicting a struggle or inner turmoil, and Sophie played it with a fierce conviction that communicated genuine feeling. Despite her youth and limited life experience, she seemed to understand the music's emotional landscape and committed fully to expressing it. In the audience, Alina gripped the armrests of her seat, barely breathing as she watched her granddaughter command that stage. Around her, she could see people leaning forward in their seats, transfixed by the performance. Some had pulled out their phones to record video, though photography was technically not allowed. The ushers made no move to stop them, equally captivated by what was happening on stage. The judges sat in rapt attention. Amanda's hand was pressed to her chest, her eyes glistening. Alessia had her hands clasped together as if in prayer. David Walliams watched with an expression of pure wonder. Even Simon, so practiced at maintaining his critical poker face, looked genuinely impressed. Backstage, Maria watched on the monitor, her heart racing with a mixture of pride and anxiety. She could see the concentration on Sophie's face, the way her daughter was completely absorbed in the music, lost in the world that Beethoven had created 2 centuries ago. This was what David Chen had recognized 3 years earlier, this ability to disappear into the music and emerge transformed. As the piece built toward its climactic conclusion, Sophie drove the tempo even harder, her small hands producing cascades of notes with crystalline clarity. The final dramatic chords rang out with commanding authority, and Sophie's hands came down on the last notes with definitive force. The audience reaction was instantaneous and explosive. People leaped to their feet, roaring their approval. The standing ovation was even more enthusiastic than it had been for the audition, sustained and heartfelt. Some people were openly weeping, overcome by the combination of Sophie's youth, her extraordinary talent, and the sheer emotional power of the performance. All 4 judges stood and applauded. Alessia had tears streaming down her face. Amanda was shaking her head in disbelief while clapping enthusiastically. David was cheering along with the audience. Simon was smiling broadly, nodding with satisfaction. Sophie stood and gave her careful bow, then looked toward the judges with an expression that mixed hope and nervousness. She clasped her hands in front of her and waited for their feedback. When the audience finally quieted enough for them to speak, Alessia went first, her voice choked with emotion. "Sophie, I don't even know what to say. I'm a mother myself, and watching you up there at 6 years old playing with such passion and skill, it's overwhelming. You didn't just play that piece, you lived it. You felt every note. That was absolutely extraordinary, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart." David Walliams nodded vigorously. "I've been thinking about what to say since your hands left the keys, and I keep coming back to the same thought. We're watching history being made. Years from now, people will look back at this moment and say, this is when the world discovered Sophie Martinez. You're not just talented for a 6-year-old, you're talented full stop. One of the most gifted musicians I've ever encountered, regardless of age." Amanda spoke next, her voice thick with emotion. "Sophie, when you performed in your audition, I thought that was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen from someone your age. But somehow you've topped it. That performance was more mature, more powerful, more moving than what you did before. You're not just maintaining your level, you're growing and improving. That's what real artists do. I'm absolutely blown away." Then it was Simon's turn. The music mogul looked at Sophie for a long moment before speaking. "Sophie, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to remember it. I've been in the music industry for over 30 years. I've worked with some of the biggest stars in the world. I've seen thousands upon thousands of performers. And what you just did on this stage ranks among the most memorable performances I've ever witnessed." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You have a gift that comes along maybe once in a generation. But more than that, you have something that can't be taught, the ability to make people feel something when you play. That's what separates good musicians from great ones, and at 6 years old you're already great. I genuinely believe we're looking at a future classical music superstar." Sophie's face lit up with pure joy. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the renewed applause from the audience. The voting that followed Sophie's performance was a formality. When the results were announced later that evening, she had received more public votes than any other act in her semi-final by a substantial margin. She advanced to the final automatically, not even needing the judges' save. The final took place 1 week later and the pressure was immense. Sophie would be performing against the best acts from all 5 semi-finals, each one a proven crowd favorite. The winner would receive a cash prize of £250,000 and the opportunity to perform at the Royal Variety Performance before members of the royal family. For the final, David Chen and Maria carefully selected Sophie's piece. They chose Liszt's La Campanella, a show-stopping composition known for its memorable melody and breathtaking technical demands. The piece, whose title means The Little Bell, features rapid repeated notes, dramatic leaps across the keyboard, and requires extraordinary finger dexterity. Sophie practiced obsessively in the week leading up to the final. Maria watched her daughter's determination with a mixture of pride and concern, making sure Sophie still took breaks to rest and play. David Chen came to London to provide coaching, fine-tuning Sophie's interpretation, and helping her build the stamina for the demanding piece. The night of the final, the Hammersmith Apollo was packed with an electric atmosphere. The other finalists were all exceptionally talented. A singer who had brought the judges to tears, a danger act that combined acrobatics with fire, a comedian whose audition had gone viral, and several other impressive performers. Sophie was the youngest finalist by far, the only one under 18. When her turn came to perform, Sophie walked onto the stage with visible confidence. The nerves were still there, but she had performed enough now to know she could handle the pressure. She sat at the piano, adjusted her position, and began to play. The opening of La Campanella rang out clear and bright, the famous bell-like melody immediately recognizable to many in the audience. Sophie's fingers danced across the keys, producing the rapid repeated notes with mechanical precision while maintaining musical expressiveness. The piece's notorious difficulty was evident, but Sophie navigated every challenge with apparent ease. The performance was flawless. Every rapid passage was crisp and clear. Every dramatic leap was perfectly executed. Every musical phrase was shaped with thoughtful interpretation. When Sophie played the final triumphant chords, the audience's response was overwhelming, the loudest ovation of the entire evening. The voting took place immediately after all the acts had performed. Viewers at home and the studio audience cast their votes while the hosts filled time with interviews and recap footage. Maria stood backstage with Sophie, holding her daughter close, trying to manage her own expectations. Win or lose, Sophie had already accomplished something remarkable. She had shared her gift with millions of people and earned recognition as a serious artist despite her youth. When the results were finally announced, the tension in the theater was palpable. The hosts drew out the moment, building suspense as they eliminated acts one by one, counting down to the winner. Sophie stood on stage with the other finalists, holding hands with the comedian on one side and the singer on the other, her small figure dwarfed by the adults around her. And the winner of Britain's Got Talent 2019 is, the host paused dramatically, Sophie Martinez. The theater erupted in cheers and applause. Confetti cannons exploded, showering the stage in golden streamers. Sophie stood frozen for a moment, seemingly unable to process what had just happened. Then her face broke into the biggest smile, and she jumped up and down with pure childish joy, all sophisticated composure forgotten in the excitement of the moment. Maria rushed onto the stage, sweeping Sophie into her arms, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. Elena appeared moments later, having run from the audience, adding her own tears and embraces to the celebration. The other judges came onto the stage to congratulate Sophie, and Simon Cowell lifted her up onto his shoulders while the audience continued to cheer. In the weeks and months that followed, Sophie's life transformed in ways that Maria could never have imagined. The £250,000 prize money was placed in a trust for Sophie's future education and musical development. Offers poured in from concert halls, music festivals, and television programs around the world. Record labels wanted to sign her. Music teachers at prestigious conservatories offered scholarships for when she was old enough to attend. But Maria and David Chen were careful to protect Sophie from exploitation. They turned down most of the offers, accepting only those that would genuinely benefit Sophie's artistic development without overwhelming her childhood. She performed at the Royal Variety Performance as promised, playing for Prince William and Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, who spoke with her afterward and praised her remarkable talent. A documentary crew followed Sophie for 6 months, creating a film about her life and musical journey that aired on the BBC to critical acclaim. The documentary showed not just her extraordinary performances, but also her normal life. Playing with friends at school, practicing piano with patient determination, helping her mother with grocery shopping, and cuddling with Mr. Hops while watching cartoons. The film helped counter some of the criticism that had followed Sophie's victory. Viewers could see that she was genuinely happy, that music was a joy rather than a burden, and that Maria was a devoted mother supporting her daughter's gift rather than a stage parent living vicariously through her child's success. Sophie continued her studies with David Chen while also beginning to work with other renowned piano teachers who could help her develop different aspects of her artistry. She performed in carefully selected concerts, building a repertoire and gaining experience while still maintaining time for school friends and childhood. By age 8, Sophie had performed at Carnegie Hall in New York, the Berlin Philharmonie, and the Royal Albert Hall in London. Critics praised not just her technical ability, which continued to astound, but her deepening musical maturity. She was developing into a complete artist, someone who could not only play the notes but communicate profound musical ideas. The story of the 6-year-old girl who amazed judges with a piano performance became more than just a viral moment or a talent show victory. It became a testament to the power of natural talent combined with dedicated nurturing, of parents who made sacrifices to give their children opportunities, and of teachers who recognized and cultivated extraordinary gifts. When journalists asked Sophie, now older and more articulate, what she wanted to accomplish with her music, she always gave a version of the same answer. "I want to share beautiful sounds with people and make them feel something. Mr. Chen taught me that music is a language everyone can understand, even if they don't speak the same words. When I play, I'm telling stories without talking, and I want to keep telling stories for as long as I can." Maria, watching her daughter continue to grow as both a person and an artist, often reflected on that first audition at the Manchester Apollo Theatre. She thought about how close she had come to not entering Sophie in the competition, worried about pressure and criticism. She thought about all the moments of doubt and fear that had accompanied their journey. But she also thought about the joy on Sophie's face when she played, the way music seemed to light her up from within. She thought about the millions of people around the world who had been moved by her daughter's performances, who had written letters describing how Sophie's music had brought them comfort during difficult times or inspired their own children to pursue their passions. The gift of talent, Maria came to understand, carried with it a responsibility to share it with the world. Sophie's extraordinary ability was not just for her own enjoyment but was meant to be given away, offered to others as a source of beauty and inspiration. And in supporting her daughter's musical journey, Maria was not pushing her towards something unwanted, but helping her fulfill her truest purpose. Years later, when Sophie performed her first complete recital at London's Wigmore Hall at age 12, receiving a prolonged standing ovation from a sold-out audience of classical music aficionados, Maria sat in the front row with tears streaming down her face. Her little girl, who had once walked nervously onto a talent show stage clutching a stuffed rabbit, had become exactly what Simon Cowell had predicted: a genuine classical music star whose artistry touched hearts around the world. And it had all begun with a 6-year-old's courage to share her gift, and a mother's faith that her daughter's talent deserved to be heard. Like, share, and subscribe, don't miss it.